Whenever I tell people this story, they never believe me. When I was 19, I was traveling solo by van around the country. I was about 3 weeks into my trip, and I was parked at a campground in Wyoming. For anyone that hasn't been there, Wyoming is so desolate that camping there is like camping on another planet. It was mid-September, and nobody else was at the camp. No other cars, no other tents, nothing. I was sitting by the small fire I had made and eating dinner. The fire and food must have taken up most of my attention, because I looked up, and there was this old Native American man sitting directly across from me. I was really freaked out because I didn't hear him walk up on the gravel or anything. There was no greeting and no warning. He asked me in a monotone voice how I got here, and I told him I drove here from Cheyenne earlier in the day and was waiting for some friends to show up. This was a lie, but he got up, stood still, looked at me, and told me, "I'm no friend of yours." Then he walked off. After sitting completely still for a few minutes, he didn't come back. Scared out of my mind, I quickly grabbed my stuff, put out the fire, and drove as far away as I could to the next biggest town, which had a Walmart that was open. I went inside and ended up sleeping in a chair until a worker woke me up in the morning. It literally freaked me out of that state, literally, and I made my way to Idaho Falls, which was a nice little town by comparison. Since that night, I've never stayed overnight in Wyoming. I used to clean houses for a living. One of my clients was a nice old guy, just a really nice dude in general. When I showed up to clean, the only thing he asked me was to leave his office alone, as he didn't want his paperwork to get messed up. I'd cleaned many offices in business or home settings before, and it was an easy rule to follow with a simple rationale, so it was no problem for me. The door stayed closed. I think he might have had the door locked regardless, but I never bothered to check. One day, he was out of town, and I was going to let myself into the house with my key so I could do my work. When I got there, the door was standing wide open. Somebody had broken in and robbed the place. It was a complete mess. The cop had me walk through the house with him when he got there, since I knew the place so well. What I didn't know from my first view of the robbed house was that the office door was standing partially open. When I looked inside, I saw, taped to every wall, pictures of children. Little kids, naked or in their underwear. Hundreds of pictures, all over the place, completely undisturbed by the robbers. I told the officer I wasn't aware of any of that, and left my contact info in case they needed to reach me. I spoke to the client on the phone, told him what had happened, and that his office was open, and that I wouldn't be working for him anymore. I have no idea how it played out after, as I never heard from him again, or the cops after that day. We were almost out of gas in Memphis, Tennessee, and stopped at the first gas station we could find. It was night, and all the windows and doors had a steel mesh on the outside of the glass for security purposes. I pull up to the pump and get out. A homeless man approaches me and starts to strike up a conversation. He asks, "Hey man, can I pump that gas for you?" I tell him, "No thanks, I've got it." "No, come on, let me do it, it's fine. I could use a couple bucks." "I'm sorry man, I just have my credit card. I don't have any cash." "That's cool. You get a pass this time. Next time I see you here, I'm going to kill you and leave you here at the pump. I pump the gas around here." He then leaned against the pump and watched me as I filled up my gas tank. I was very uneasy, to say the least, as the receipt didn't print out and I really needed it for my bank book at the time. So I walked to the door to go inside. Sure enough, it was locked. It had a buzzer on the outside with a sign that said, "One customer at a time." The attendant inside was behind the thickest plexiglass barricade I have ever seen in my life. He seemed horrified that I came inside just to get a receipt. I went back outside, and the homeless guy was still at my pump. As I approached my car, he says, "It's about time you be leaving." My wife and I left the station and spent the whole next day at the nearby zoo. We didn't go back into the city for the rest of the week. It's still the most terrifying experience I've ever had on a vacation. It's funny how things process differently when you're young. It took a couple years to sink in how creepy my situation was. Back in 5th grade, my buddies and I used to play with airsoft guns and have our little deathmatch battles up in the hills behind our houses. We all grew up in a very safe, affluent, suburban neighborhood in Southern California, and would regularly explore and play all over the place without too many rules. One summer evening, approaching dusk, we started our match and split into the usual 2 teams of 4. My friend Tegan and I stayed together and ran up the hill a bit to a concrete water runoff. It wasn't the highest point on the hill, but it proved to be a great spot to hide and overlook the action from above. While we were up at our post, Tegan made it apparent to me that a man was watching us and descending towards where we were from the top of the hill. At this point, we weren't alarmed, just curious. The man approached through the tall brush and jumped the fence to where we were stationed. He looked pretty normal from what I can recall, albeit his clothes were a tad dirty. The man approached Tegan, immediately grabbed his arm, and pulled out a dirty-looking syringe. The man looked at both of us and calmly said, "If I poke you with this, the snakes won't bite." For a moment, Tegan and I were pretty confused. We both had this "we trust adults" kind of mindset when we were kids that was quickly challenged by this man. From what I recall, we pretty quickly understood that this wasn't right, and we started to yell, and I began to shoot my airsoft gun into the air. Our friends came out of hiding and saw us up on the hill. The man obviously realized that all of these kids have weapons and immediately took off back in the direction he came. Looking back, it was super weird that we just stayed out there. If anything, I feel like it was a way for us to temporarily forget what just happened. I remember all of us laughing about it, finishing our airsoft match, and then proceeding to go home and tell our parents. This then led to school announcements, a section in the local paper, and neighborhood watch signs. They never caught the guy. When I was younger, Georgia was hit with a really bad snowstorm that lasted for almost a week. It took place in 2014, pretty much when I was in elementary school. My dad was caught in the snowstorm and couldn't make it back home on the roads, so it was basically my stepmother, my brother, and I sitting in the living room for most of the evening. When it got to be late at night, my brother and I fell asleep in our bedroom, while my stepmom stayed downstairs in the living room. At the townhome we were living in, there was a giant window that sat next to the living room that looked across the side of the building into the woods about 15 or so feet away. If I remember correctly, she said that it was quiet except for the sound of the wind outside when she heard tapping at the window. She looked at the glass and didn't see anyone, but she figured only a person could make that kind of sound, so she freaked out and quickly went upstairs into the bedroom with my brother and I. She stayed up there for the rest of the night and into the next morning, watching over us. When it started to get light out, she left the bedroom, went downstairs, and looked around. There was no sign of any break-in or anything suspicious, so she went outside where there was a couple inches of snow that had fallen during the night. Once she walked around the backyard towards the large window, she saw footsteps that led from the woods next to our house and towards the window, the same window where she heard the tapping the night before. There were no footprints that led from the window back into the woods. Basically, someone had walked out of the tree line to the window and stood there for a long time, or they were able to retrace their footsteps perfectly to re-enter the woods. The footprints hadn't been filled in, even with all of the snow that had fallen during the night, so that meant they had probably stayed there for hours or had come back more than once while we were asleep, retracing their steps each time. We have no idea who did this or why they would want to, and it was terrifying that somebody had been standing outside in a winter storm, watching us for so long, and my brother and I had no idea for years. It still creeps me out to this day.